Nothing contained in this podcast should be considered a substitute for professional medical advice. This content does not represent our respective employers and is purely the opinion of the podcast hosts. We are not your personal medical providers. Sorry, friends. So, if you have any questions or concerns or seeking advice, diagnosis, and or treatment, please seek individual, personalized advice from a healthcare provider in your area. We are not liable for any risks or issues associated with using or acting upon the information contained in this podcast. This is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only, so enjoy the ride. Welcome to Medical Media Mixer, the perfect cocktail. I'm Nicole Peniston.
And I'm Tara Prisco.
All right. Here we are, episode 4.
We've made it. I feel like that's like we're 5, I think, is like a milestone. So we're almost there.
If you say so. I think everyone's a milestone.
True. I'm making them up as we go. So I do want to let you know that I did get my hair done today. I got my hair highlighted and blown out. So I hope Mama Deb approve.
She will let us know.
Anything random this weekend?
No. I do need to ask you some medical advice later when we're not recording.
Yeah. HIPAA compliance.
Yes. But no, just like kind of, I wrapped some Christmas gifts today, watched some Christmas movies, just kind of hung out, was low-key, had a lot of work to catch up on since I'm going away for Christmas. I need to do everything that's due before Christmas plus everything that's due after Christmas. So
fun stuff.
Fun stuff.
I ran kids.
Accomplished more than I expected this weekend. So
that's good. I have nothing wrapped, but I'll make that work. I actually do we do for the kids' gifts and Anthony's gifts, we do reusable cloth sacks that are color for each person because to me that was one less thing that I have to do because I hate wrapping.
Yeah, well, one less thing to think about.
Yeah. But for other people, I wrap. But we did a little bit of painting Christmas cookies or whatever, icing, decorating them before we came up. We did a little contest, me and the girls, and then Anthony had to vote on who's he liked better of each kind.
And who was the winner?
Me, of course, because I'm the adult. And
that's cheating. The adult can't win. One of the children has to win.
Well, there was like 5 or 6 different types of designs. So we each did a reindeer, a snowman, a this, and that. So we all got votes for different things, but it was fun.
Okay.
And then my youngest had a sleepover last night for the first time at a friend's house, not like a cousin's, and she was up till 12:30 in the mornings. Thanks to the dance mom who hosted. I am so glad you survived. This kid needs to go to bed early. So that's why, after we record, to bed.
But she had fun at her first sleepover.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
She's on a high.
Oh, that's great. My first sleepover, I cried and wanted to come home early.
Oh, I mean, she's warmed up with obviously grandparents and her cousins she's done. But this is the first friend one. Nice. So, and it was her dance friends. So it was fun.
Oh.
I hear my own dog barking.
Your own dog this time.
Chip went home. So.
Aw. Bye-bye, Chip.
All right. So what do we have to talk about? I think we're doing musically related things today.
We are. So first and foremost, I'll tell you about my cocktail. And this time it's actually not a spoiler to what I'm going to talk about. So it's kind of cool. So my cocktail is called The Suffering Bastard. And it contains 1 ounce of bourbon, or I used whiskey because whiskey and bourbon are very similar. Apparently, you could also use cognac, 1 ounce of dry gin, 1 tablespoon of lime juice, 1 dash of Angostura bitters, and approximately 4 ounces of chilled ginger beer. So that's what I've got to drink today.
Yeah, nice.
And my topic for today is talking about the music video for the song November Rain by Guns N' Roses. So I don't know about you, but this was an epic video. I used to watch it all the time. I was obsessed with it, obsessed with the song. It was, I mean,
this is definitely one of those throwback songs that you hear this and everybody's out there singing and banging their heads a little bit and rocking.
Yeah. So I'll give you a little background on the music video, just some facts, and then we'll get into what happens in the music video, what it's actually about, and then I'll talk about some resources. So where are my notes? Here we go. So, fun facts. It is one of the most expensive music videos ever made. And it is also the longest guitar solo to ever make #1 on a chart. And that guitar solo by Slash was originally improvised when they were first kind of making up the song. In the music video, which I'll get to the details of what happens, there's a church in the middle of the desert. They actually had that church moved from a different location and put in the desert just for the filming of this video. So that tells you just
up on a truck and literally moved it.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that tells you kind of how much, budget they had for
I
this.
wonder if that budget is in like today dollars or like,
That's
I
a
don't know.
good
I mean, they
question.
don't
I didn't
really
actually quote it because I just knew that it was a lot. So it's
a
like,
lot.
that's
Yeah.
almost
No, I mean, if
a
you
lot of
found the
money.
statistic that it was the most, I'm just curious, like people,
One
I
of
guess,
the
make
most.
epic videos now anyway. So there's no
Yeah,
like
I feel like
MTV is not the thing like it was.
Yeah, and I feel like people spend more of that money on like their concerts or stuff like that. So it's still
Right.
performance, but
Right.
different.
Right.
And then, so it was rumored that Elton John and his style of playing the piano influenced the song when Axl Rose was writing it, which he began writing at least 10 years before the music video was released. And then, actually, when there was a live performance at one of the award shows, I forgot to write down which one, Elton John actually played the piano for the song during it. So that's pretty cool. November Rain is supposedly part of a trilogy of related songs and videos with Don't Cry and Estranged, which are Don't Cry was like a semi-popular song. Estranged I'd never heard before, and I'll get into kind of where I think they fall. Nobody really says like what order, but when you watch them, you kind of see the plot line moving.
Got it.
So November Rain the song was originally released in February 1992 as the third single from Guns N' Roses' third studio album called Use Your Illusion 1. And it peaked at number 3 on the US Billboard Hot 100 charts and was the longest song to ever enter the top 10 chart at the time of its release. I don't know what long songs are on there now, but it was a 13-minute song. So
Oh,
pretty
wow.
long. Yeah. And so that's all of those facts about that. It clearly had a pretty critical reception. Lots of people really enjoy it even to this day. It's a pretty epic song. And I feel like a lot of people have heard it. It's weird though. I feel like it's not played in a lot of like movies or like commercials or things like that, which a lot of those really famous songs tend to be more incorporated into things, but not November Rain. Maybe it's a licensing thing. Maybe Guns
Right.
N' Roses would not allow that. Who knows? Like I said, it peaked at number 3 for 2 weeks in 1992. It was their last top 10 hit for Guns N' Roses.
Yeah, I guess they kind of had like, that was just after the 80s, and then they kind of
Yeah. And so I'm going to go kind of not frame by frame, but tell you the overall general plot of the video if you've never seen it, but it's worth a watch and it's on YouTube. So I feel like if you guys haven't seen it, you should check it out. So the overall arching plot of the story is, and this is funny because I didn't know this until I looked it up, is that Axl Rose gets married to Stephanie Seymour in the video, who was a big model in the 80s and 90s at that time. But they were actually dating when this video was recorded, and the trilogy of videos, because she is in all 3 of them. So in the video, it kind of shows their wedding scene, and then at the end there's a funeral, and it's not like 1,000% clear how she dies, but I do know how. And we'll get to that later on in the plot. But one of the things, I don't know about you, that I remember from the video is that iconic high-low wedding dress. It was like super nice. Yeah, she was rocking that. Of course, like Stephanie Seymour, supermodel, she was gorgeous. So what happens in the video? So again, it opens and there's like people, it's a wedding scene and she's walking down the aisle in this dress. And the actual very first scene in the video, which is very brief, it's only maybe like 10 seconds long, is Axl Rose wakes up from a nightmare and he's taking some pills. You see like a bottle of alcohol on his nightstand. So he's clearly not coping well. And then throughout the video, you see him in the midst of nightmares or waking up from nightmares and using drugs and drinking. Also, it's a lot of clips from actual performances that the band did of the song that are incorporated into the video. So some of those are just live shots that they weaved into the plot of the movie. So they get married. One like silly little part of the scene is that Slash is supposed to be like the ring bearer, and then he loses the ring, and some other dude in the band has the ring. And then, they kiss, and it's this big, deep 80s wild hair kiss. And then Slash walks out and starts his first of, I believe, 2 guitar solos. And then it flashes to the reception where, it's a general reception, lots of people dancing and drinking and eating, and there's live bands playing. And then all of a sudden it starts to rain and it's pouring and people start running for cover from the rain. And this dude basically falls right into the wedding cake, which is like another iconic part of that video. And then a bottle of red wine spills all over a white tablecloth. And then there's a very brief scene which shows them, I guess, partying before the wedding or maybe around the time that they first met at the Rainbow Room. So do you know anything about the Rainbow Room?
I mean, I know it's famous for famous people, but
Yeah, it was a famous club, I believe, in Los Angeles. I did not do my research on the Rainbow Room, but I believe that's where River Phoenix died, on the sidewalk of the Rainbow Room,
Oh,
which I
gotcha.
believe happened just before this video or just after, around the same time frame. Either way, they kind of briefly reference the Rainbow Room, and I think that's why it's so brief, because of that negative association at the time. It seems like when you're watching the video, there might have been more to that scene, and maybe they cut it out. Also, since it's a very long song in music video, they might have just cut it out for time too. And then so, everybody's hiding from the rain, and then all of a sudden there's a funeral, and Stephanie Seymour is in the casket, and this is the part of the video that, until I found out what the whole video was about, I was like, why is this? So if you watch the scene of the funeral very closely, it's kind of like a shot from like bird's eye view from the ceiling of Stephanie Seymour in the casket, and it looks like she's cut in half by glass. Well, actually, it's a mirror that's obscuring half of her face, because supposedly she died by suicide from a gunshot wound. So I'm assuming maybe it was a gunshot wound to the face, and so the mirror kind of hides that side of her face. You only see the perfect side.
Wow.
But I just remember when that video happened, I was like, did you see, why is she cut in half with glass? What happened?
Yeah.
How did she die? And everybody's like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And then apparently lots of other people on the interwebs knew what I was talking about, and that's what it is.
Internet sleuths. You got it.
And then, the rest of the video is Slash's iconic guitar solo where he stands on top of the piano and he's, jamming out. And then the video ends at her funeral where, again, everybody's at the funeral and it starts pouring rain and everybody's leaving, and Axl just stays there in the rain weeping over her grave. And then the very final scene is where you see her throw the white bouquet of roses from the wedding, and then in midair, the roses turn red. And then when they land on the coffin, they are red, and then the rain washes them pink and then to white. And that's the end of the video. And at the very, very end of the video, if you watch it like all the way till like it goes dark, it says that the song, not the video, was based on a short story written by Del James called Without You. Now, I was going to go down the rabbit hole and read this story, but a lot of people said that it was a waste of their time. I don't know how good this story is. Everybody's a critic, but I did not read it because honestly, I didn't want to pay $9.99 to read a story that I might not like. Sorry.
True.
So that's the whole video. That's what happens. And then the lyrics, and I feel like this is pretty straightforward. The lyrics are about unrequited love, that things don't last forever, and trying to tell someone to hold on to hope. Because a lot of the lyrics are talking about, do you need some time alone? Do you need some time by yourself? It's okay to need someone. So it's kind of talking about somebody who's struggling and that it's okay to need support. So like I said, the plot of the video is that Axl is grieving the loss of his wife, and she died by suicide. And she died by suicide because apparently he was sleeping around, which comes up in the other two videos. So in what I'm assuming is the first in the trilogy is Don't Cry, where it shows a lot of him both with Stephanie, but then with other women, and they're arguing and they're fighting. There's like a little like hint of possible domestic violence, but you don't see anything. Basically, you see them arguing, and then he pushes her up against the wall and she has a gun in her hand. So maybe he's trying to stop her. Who knows? But that's in the Don't Cry video. And then in the Estranged video, it's kind of like the aftermath where like the SWAT team shows up at the house and they take her body away, and then they want to arrest him. And it's much more murky. The Estranged video, what is happening, it's not as clear cut as the other two videos.
Interesting. Yeah, I had no clue that whole series of connections. Mm-hmm. So now I have to go and deep dive and look into these.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for the internet.
Yeah. And I don't remember his name because I didn't write it down. I'm terrible. But the drummer for Guns N' Roses said that the three songs are definitely connected because he purposely used the same sort of drum beats and riffs, not riffs for drums, you know what I mean? The same sort of drum rhythms throughout three songs to connect them.
Interesting.
So there is rumors that the songs and the videos are also based on / inspired by Axl Rose's real life relationship with Erin Everly, who was the daughter of one of the Everly brothers. Apparently they had a very tumultuous relationship, which then ended. I do not believe she committed suicide though. So as I was saying, my cocktail is The Suffering Bastard. So it's talking about how people cope or don't cope very well with the loss of someone due to suicide. So I've got some statistics here. Let me bring those up. Well, any questions, comments about all that video stuff, all the fun stuff before I get into the dark
I mean,
stuff?
I definitely remember the epicness of the video, but I guess back then when you're younger, you're not really thinking about the deep meaning of it. Right. You're just sort of watching it cinematically. So It's interesting to take a step back now and look at it differently.
Yeah. And then, so some statistics. Why is it being so slow? So, as of the CDC's 2022 data and statistics of fatal injury reports, suicide was the 11th leading cause of death in the US. And in 2022, 49,476 Americans died of suicide, and there were 1.6 million suicide attempts. And then there is another statistic from the CDC that suicide by gun has reached an all-time high in 2022, and gun homicides were slightly down from 2021. So it seems like when people are choosing their weapon of choice, they are going for a more lethal means. There are old statistics, I don't know the current ones, about how women tend to use non-lethal means or slower means, and men tend to use more lethal means like guns, driving cars off of cliffs, things like that.
Interesting. And I wonder if there's any kind, I mean, we're not getting into a gun thing, but just whether there's a state to state difference based on access. You know,
I'm
some
sure
states
there
have
is. Yeah.
a lot stricter laws than others. Where we're from, New Jersey has definitely, significantly strict laws. So obviously it's still possible. You can still get something from someone that you don't illegally or someone who has it legally. I'm just wondering if that access changes.
Yeah, and I also wonder, because I think there's a lot of tension around gun laws and gun access, and I know that people who are using guns for recreational means like hunting and things like that, they don't want to lose their rights to those, or people who feel like they have the right to be armed, which is in the Constitution. I do feel like it's really about safety and gun safety, which we've always talked about for a long time, keeping your bullets separate from your weapons and keeping everything locked and things like that. Because I also wonder if some of those deaths by gun are accidental. We know definitely back in the 80s and the 90s, we always saw those after school specials, or
wasn't there an episode of 90210?
Yes,
where
someone is
David's
playing
friend,
around.
yes.
Sorry, I needed a sip of my suffering bastard. Yeah, there's definitely some deaths by gun, at least we know in the past, some statistics that were not necessarily intentional. So it doesn't really suss those differences out. And then just, for everyone is familiar with the connection of depression and suicide, but also suicide can come from significant social stressors like loss of job, family loss, relationship loss, health issues, health crises. And so I want everyone to know that if you are struggling and you are having difficulty, the national lifeline is 988, where you can call that from anywhere in the United States and get in touch with a suicide prevention expert. But 988 also offers support for someone who's lost a loved one to suicide. So it's not just for someone who's struggling, it's for the families who are also struggling.
And that's fairly new, right? That
Yes.
988 number.
That was just released, I want to say in 2022, end of 2022, 2023. So that is new. And I'm glad that we have the support out there. But there's definitely support out there. There's also other resources. In the show notes, I have linked resources for survivors of suicide loss, including online directories for grief and counseling groups, support groups, other places where you can get help if you've been impacted and you're looking for support. So that's it. That was really fast, I feel like.
That's okay. Mine is very long.
Well, look at that.
No worries. I'm going to bring it up a little bit later. So that's good, because okay. I mean, that was a very serious topic, and it's really hard to be light and airy during that. So yeah, let's have a drink first.
Cheers.
My drink is pink. My drink is called the Dancing Queen.
Ooh.
So right there, that invokes a completely different feel.
Yeah, we're taking a 380, 360, 120.
No, 360, you're back where you were. So 180 is you turned around.
180. I don't know my degree. Look, I'm not a doctor of math.
Neither am I. All right. So this is from imbibemagazine.com. It is 1 3/4 ounces of vodka, 3/4 ounce of fresh lime juice, half ounce of, I had to look this up and order it on the internet, falernum syrup, which is ginger, lime, and almond. I bought it. It's actually interesting. I have to find other uses for it. Half an ounce of blackberry syrup, 2 dashes of bitters, orange bitters, and shake it up with some ice and pour it over some crushed ice. You can garnish it with lime if you'd like. So it's actually different because it has that other syrup in it. That ginger, lime, almond is definitely a nuanced flavor, which is pretty neat. I've never tasted that before.
Nice.
So I am also doing a song. And actually, because you were doing a music video, I look up this song does not have an official music video, actually, because I think a lot of people aren't making them now. And maybe this wasn't like number one released by this person anyway. But there is an art school who, I guess, a few years after the song was released, actually did a video, which was pretty neat, which I watched. So the song is called Choreomania by Florence and the Machine. And if you look up the video that's done by this art school, it'll say dance video. So I'm going to read you the lyrics and then we'll talk a little bit about what Choreomania is. And honestly, Florence and the Machine, like, you know, any songs that have been on the radio, I love. And I know her collaboration on Taylor Swift with that one song was like absolutely amazing. I had never heard of this one. I keep playing it over and over. It's really good.
I feel like when I was searching for songs, it kept popping up, but I never clicked on it. So
yeah, so there's definitely some aspects you'll be able to speak to. So lyrics are, and I am freaking out in the middle of the street with a complete conviction of someone who's never had anything actually really bad happen to them. But I am committed now to the feeling. I don't know how it started, don't know how to stop it. Suddenly I'm dancing to imaginary music. Something's coming, so out of breath, I just kept spinning and I danced myself to death. Something's coming, so out of breath, I just kept spinning and I danced myself to death. And this is the end, and I'm thinking about her driving around in the backseat of the car. I'll be your demon daddy, and do they speak to you? Because they speak to me too. The pressure and the panic you push your body through. Something's coming, so out of breath, I just kept spinning, so I danced myself to death. Something's coming, so out of breath, I just kept spinning, so I danced myself to death. There's one more verse. You just said that rock and roll is dead, but it is just because it has not been resurrected in your image. Like if Jesus came back, but in a beautiful dress, and all the evangelicals were like, oh yes, oh yes. And then I repeat the chorus. So let's talk about like just the word choreomania, right? So we know choreo means typically to dance, choreography, choreograph, and mania, which obviously you know what that means, typically an excessive or abnormal propensity or desire, such as pyromania, or you can call something maybe lighter that's not a clinical, type of a thing like balletomania or bibliomania, somebody who just really likes something.
Yeah, I feel like people throw around the word manic very easily when somebody's just doing something more than usual.
Right. So, according to songfacts.com, Florence Welch wrote this song after she was fascinated by a historical phenomenon called choreomania.
I was hoping you were going to talk about the history.
Yes, in which crowds of people dance themselves to exhaustion. So, this to me is like the first flash mob.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Well, when I first heard about it and heard a deep dive on a different podcast, I had thoughts about what was actually happening, but I'll save those until you do your coverage of it.
Yes. So I had actually not heard of this song, and I'm gonna give a little credit to one of my favorite podcasts. And that's why The Drink did their 400th episode.
Yes.
And else covered this.
That's
specifically,
what I was talking about.
Right? The most famous occurrence, 1518. And then when I was doing my research, I also realized that this podcast will kill you covered it in episode 40. Of course, them taking the more scientific approach to it. Mm-hmm. So 2 different perspectives. And then we're somewhere in the middle, I think, a little history, a little fun, a little science. So basically, they call these the dancing plague. It was first recorded in Aachen, which is a city in what now is Germany, in 1374. That was the first recorded one of dancing mania. But periodically in Europe until the 17th century, these things occurred in different towns where thousands of people would just dance uncontrollably, screaming, shouting, claiming to have visions. But the most famous one occurred in Strasbourg, France in 1518. So that's like kind of the basis of all of this. And that's the one that most people sort of studied. There's actually papers on it and things.
Yeah. I think the first thing I always think of when I hear about these historical accounts from so long ago is, were they actually dancing, or are these just jerky, rapid movements that people had no other name for? So they called it dancing.
Right. And that definitely is part of this. So it all started with Frau Trophia, good old Frau Trophia. She stepped into the street and she began to silently twist, twirl, shake on July 14th, 1518. So she kept on doing this on her own alone for 6 days. Eventually, 3 dozen other people from Strasbourg joined in. And by August, now we're 3 weeks later, the dancing epidemic had claimed as many as 400 people. With no other explanation, local doctors said it was hot blood and suggested that they just let them do it or help them with it. So they constructed a stage and brought in dancers and a band.
And the band. I wonder how that band felt when they got that gig. They're
I
like,
assume it's like well, this is in France, but it's in that sort of area. I don't know, because it's throughout Germany and all these other places. I don't know if it's a Oompa band. I don't know if it's, but again, like, is this just like a street, like a dance party in the street? Is this just like a festival? So basically people started collapsing from exhaustion. Some even died of heart attack and strokes. And it went until September. And the reason it stopped is because they took them to a mountaintop shrine to pray for their absolution. So
they quarantined them essentially.
Essentially, it didn't stop on its own. They whisked them away to try and heal them. Like we said, a flash mob, like a dance-a-thon, But the other thing this kind of relates to, during COVID, everybody was TikTok dancing.
Yes,
even though we weren't all together.
And that's why we drink. Yes.
Right? But it does sort of make sense under times of weird stress or whatever. I don't know. People like to dance.
Well, and that's why I was asking, were they actually dancing or were they just making these weird movements? Because our dancing now is very different than what dancing was back then.
Right. So, it's a very well documented in the 16th century records. There are other incidents in Switzerland, Germany, and Holland. And some people thought it was demonic possession. Some people said it was overheated blood. I'm going to go through a couple other possibilities. One was that they consumed bread made from rye flour that was contaminated with ergot. And the American sociologist Robert Bartholomew, he thought that they were adherents of a heretical sect dancing to attract divine favor. The most widely accepted theory was an American medical historian, John Waller, who posited that it was mass psychogenic disorder, which we're going to come back to.
We Americans know everything, so we have to say that we know exactly what happens, even though no one in the centuries since then has figured it out.
Right. So the abstract of the paper, Dancing Plague, A Public Health Conundrum by Donaldson, Kavanagh, and Rankin said, a retrospective historical review of this public health problem reveals claims for causative factors, including demonic possession, epilepsy, the bite of a tarantula, ergot poisoning, and social adversity. It seems unlikely that dancing mania resulted from one single cause, but rather resulted from multiple factors, combined with predisposing cultural background and triggered by adverse social circumstances. Dancing mania remains an unsolved mystery of public health. So they mentioned the tarantula, and I just want a little side note. There is a dance, an Italian dance, the tarantella, which is supposed to be by a form of also hysteria, 15th to 17th century, so similar time, associated with the bite of a tarantula spider. So again, and they have an official dance that has carried on and was done at my wedding. I don't know if you remember, we have actually a photograph. It's where everyone's in the circle, holding hands, dancing, go up in the middle, come back. And our photographer took a really cool picture from underneath, laying up with all the people coming together. So I won't forget that. That was pretty cool. So
do you want my unpopular theory now before you go into?
Sure.
So this is 1500s to 1700s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these were relatively smallish towns.
Yes.
So probably a lot of those people were related.
Yes.
And isn't Huntington's chorea, or however you say it, isn't that genetic?
It is. And I'm going to touch on that.
Okay, good. Yay.
But I don't think it could explain this because it all presented at the same exact moment.
Right. And they were probably all different ages and different.
Right. Yeah. But we will hit
that was kind of in the back of my head. I was like, wait a minute, we're calling this chorea. Right. Well, not everybody calls it, but that's what we call that rhythmic movement. And we know that there is a neurological and genetic predisposition.
So, really the two biggest theories are the ergot poisoning and the mass psychogenic illness. So
which
ergot
both were also come up during the Salem witch trial.
I was going to tell you that. I was going to say we have to definitely touch on that. There's so many movies and books and things relating to Salem witch trials. So we'll save that for spooky season.
I can't wait. Every day is spooky season. All year is spooky season.
All right. So basically, let me
Sorry.
Okay. So ergot. So throughout medieval European literature, there's reports of mysterious outbreaks that left thousands of people dead from ergot poisoning. It was known as St. Anthony's Fire, which was named for the group of monks who attempted to help cure them, basically. They typically happened in the summers after cold, wet winters and damp springs. And what happened essentially is this fungus called ergot. Well, the actual name is Claviceps purpurea. But basically this fungus, it can grow in any grain, but it works well on rye because it seems to follow their growing season. So what happened is as they like separate out the rye through their, machines, which are probably like hand, whatever, some of that got in there. And it is a real known thing, ergot poisoning. And it can have a couple different forms. So there's a gangrenous form, which was low blood supply to your extremities. And there was a convulsive form, which was more seizure-like or twitching, things like that. So it was interesting.
That was my other thought, was that it was all like a seizure disorder from like something environmental.
Right. So that still is a decent theory. Now, we didn't have great epidemiological, this word and me are not going to work today. We didn't have robust
epidemiological.
Yes, counting of all of these things.
But
I can pronounce so many things. My brain can read it, but I can't say that word. So they were saying that in things west of the Rhine River, it was more likely gangrenous, and east of the Rhine River were more likely convulsive. But that really doesn't make sense for this case, because then Strasbourg would have been in the gangrenous side. But again, I don't think people were
on the weather.
Yeah, I don't know. I am not a crop plant.
Well, I'm thinking like if it's basically a fungus, it probably depends on the type of weather about how much it grows, maybe.
Yeah, and I would say,
or if it was like a warm year or a colder year.
Right. I mean, then the thought is like, why does this same fungus have two different types of ways it presents? Is it sometimes more of the active chemical, like you said, because of weather and, water? We're not really, 100% sure, but
or maybe it's something like biological, like when the person ingests it, something in their biology,
right,
identifies which one it becomes.
It could be,
which goes back to my everybody being related thing.
Right, true. So the mechanism is basically, it's an ergot alkaloid that hits our neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, and epinephrine, and it results in contraction of smooth muscles. So the smooth muscles in the gastrointestinal tract and the heart, which would be the arterial constriction, slow blood flow, and that would be the gangrenous type. The convulsive features muscular convulsions, double vision, and hallucinations. And actually, the ergot alkaloids are chemically similar to LSD. So maybe they were just all tripping.
Maybe.
Like the world's biggest group.
I mean, now it sounds like Woodstock.
Yeah, or a rave. So, and I wrote here, like we said, Salem witch trials. So we'll definitely come back to that one episode. There were medicinal uses of ergot. So even back then, they actually would have people eat a certain amount of seeds of it in order to help induce labor. And the midwives had like a very much formula, like you eat this much of it and it works, but you have to be careful because then the baby's going to come very quickly. Later on, when, the actual medical doctors started getting involved, they got a little overzealous with it and then caused some stillbirths. But ergot actually does have some medical uses nowadays. So it was used for migraines until we came up with some new things. And it's being explored for Parkinson's. So it is one of those things that the dose makes the poison. So, back to our historian, John Waller, the guy from America, he states that he debunked the ergot hypothesis in his book, A Time to Die, A Time to Dance, A Time to Dance, A Time to Die in 2009.
That's a good title.
That the ergot can cause convulsions and hallucinations, but also restricts blood flow. He theorized that someone poisoned by it simply could not dance for several days in a row. But typically, the two forms didn't present together. So the convulsive form and the gangrenous form were rarely found in the same person. So that he doesn't quite nix it with his theory. So I'm kind of undecided on that one.
Yeah. Well, I also feel like when people are like, well, a human can't do this for this many days. Well, yeah, in theory, but then we've all seen like things that are contrary to that. So it's like, this is slightly off topic, but like I was doing this conference about sleep and insomnia, and somebody made a comment like, well, the human brain can't survive on only 3 hours of sleep for several days. But that's not true. Like, we know it does survive. It's not surviving well, but people do
Right.
live on limited amount of sleep, and it's not healthy. But it's like kind of making those big sweeping statements doesn't necessarily take into account those other issues that are kind of like a mystery.
Right. And I imagine if these people were doing this from July through September, they had to drink something or eat something, even if it was while they were dancing, and they had to defecate and urinate somewhere. Like, there's things that had to happen.
Yeah.
So, the other main theory is the mass psychogenic illness, otherwise called a mass sociogenic illness or mass psychogenic disorder or epidemic hysteria or mass hysteria. But we don't like the word hysteria. So,
For many reasons.
yeah. So, basically this is the rapid spread of illness, signs and symptoms affecting members of a large group. Typically, a nervous system disturbance can be excitation, loss or alteration of function. Physical complaints are exhibited unconsciously and have no corresponding organic etiology. So it's interesting because it typically does occur in the context of a credible threat, such as there was times of warfare or bioterrorism. People will say that they smell fumes of something, and then the next person will say it, and everybody will say it, and it sort of balloons as everybody's smelling it, and then you can scientifically check and there was actually no fume there. But because it's under this anxiety of some sort of warfare or bioterrorism, it seems to propagate. So, they say that here we go. Every European dancing plague between 1374 and 1518 was near Strasbourg in that edge of the Holy Roman Empire. And at that time, they had famines, smallpox, syphilis. There was a local belief that people who failed to appease Saint Vitus, the patron saint of epileptics and dancers, would be cursed. So there was a lot of social pressures at that time, that could have been causing this.
Yeah.
So, again, it's, I don't think we're going to ever know, obviously.
Well, and I also think too, like around that time, life was generally stressful. So, having this release or doing something different, at least to start, can be kind of like an emotional release of things. But then it's the reason that it continued is more of like the mystery to me.
Right. Exactly. So, the other thing that came up in the This Podcast Will Kill You is they spoke a little bit about mirror neurons, and I didn't have time to really deep dive into that. But that is very interesting in that our brains sort of want to mirror what other people do, and that could propagate something like this.
Well, it's more specific. It's mirroring what we see other people do. So
Right.
If we're seeing something and interpreting it a certain way, we want to do what we've interpreted that they're doing. So like the easiest example, mirror neurons come up a lot in some of the research on children with autism and that social emotional reciprocity. But like a perfect example is we did this when we both signed on. You smiled, I smiled. I smiled because I saw you smiling, but I also smiled because I know you. I was happy to see you, things like that. But that initial copying of people's facial expressions, body posture, things like that is connected to those mirror neurons. So there is something in our brain that is priming us to copy what we see. It's just what we do with that and how often we do it and what we interpret it as also.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like I have to read more, but that's a really interesting scientific basis to why we do things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything else on mass psychogenic illness that you can offer? I'm not sure if you learned something else.
No, I think you covered most of it. I think the thing that like I touched on is these tend to happen in times of like extreme stress that are happening in, whatever environment that it's in. I think a lot of times, and it's happening again in the story, it tends to start with women or girls. And so it's kind of wondering like, is this something that we're assigning to women or girls, or is it, the way that we are socialized differently is making us express these things, and then other people are carrying on, because we know it wasn't all women that were dancing, but it started with a woman. The same thing with the witch trials. It started with a woman, then there were some male witches in there, but like also kind of wondering what that gender or what that socialization does and how that comes up with it. And then we know the connections of hysteria to females as well. So I'm kind of wondering if, even though we're not using it and we see the negative parts of it, if there's something there, something that we're missing, that we're not making the connection with scientifically, biologically, that we're missing out on.
Yeah. Interesting. So chorea is also, as we talked about at the very beginning, is a medical term.
Mhm.
So chorea is defined as an excessive spontaneous movements, irregularly timed, non-repetitive, randomly distributed, and abrupt in character. So they can be anything from restlessness with mild intermittent exaggeration of a gesture or a facial expression, fidgeting movements of the hands, unstable dance-like gait to a continuous flow of like disabling violent movements.
Mhm.
So when I think about it, I think of, and I'm going to do a little movement on the screen here for anyone if we see this, is more of a
Like a wave
movement like this in a twisting, turning, serpentine sort of. And that might be just because of things that I learned when I was in school. There are a couple different forms. So chorea is usually accompanied by aphestosis and ballism. Aphestosis is a slower form. The slow movements have that writhing. That's what I was kind of picturing.
Mhm.
And ballism is very severe where there's violent flinging. So if you think about it as a quicker flinging. They're involuntary, usually involve the limbs, and ballismus can usually be unilateral. Couple of medical things that cause chorea, as you spoke about, Huntington's chorea. So Huntington's chorea is the most common cause of chorea, but it is not common in general.
Mhm.
It's a genetic condition and it is typically presents in the 4th or 5th decade of life
Mhm.
and is progressive. And it often, because it is a dominant inherited condition, people have already procreated and had children before they realize they have it and then unknowingly have possibly pass it on to their own children. So nowadays, it's a little bit different because you can know, grandpa had it. But I think when we had generations where you're only lived to a certain age or your grandparents passed and maybe didn't understand all the medical history, I think we can track it a lot better now.
We can, but I think, and I don't know if it's the same, but like when I'm ever doing like a biopsychosocial on someone, so many people still to this day, oh, well, my family didn't talk about that. Or, so-and-so had something, but we don't know what it was and they were never diagnosed. So I think that's still pretty pervasive in a lot of things because I think it's a cultural thing, us
True.
wanting to not share our problems with people and talk about them, even though we know, hey, that could be a genetic component. That could be something we need to look out for in the future.
Right. I mean, so, the sad thing about Huntington's is that it's progressive. You will eventually neurologically degenerate. There's no cure. There are some things they're working on. There are definitely trials, especially with families, people who aren't affected yet, but know they carry it. And, toward the end of life, swallowing is going to become difficult. So nutrition management is important. So it's very complex. It is not common, but is the most common form of chorea.
If I remember correctly, I think one of the most painful things about it is I thought your cognitive functions are spared. So you're still completely aware of everything that's going on.
Yes. And that's sad, know. So the other big one, and this is someone we've probably all seen in the media, Michael J. Fox, or at least people who remember him from,
He just had a documentary released last year. Like, people have to know who he is.
Back to the Future and
Family
what was
Ties.
the show? Family Ties. So the difference is, so he has Parkinson's. Parkinson's itself on its own does not cause chorea. It causes a different kind of movement disorder, which is typically a tremor, shuffling gait, rigidity in your extremities. But there is a percentage of people who are treated with the most common drug, levodopa, who levodopa plus Parkinson's for them becomes choreiform movements. So that's why he has that unstable movement. His are not typical of Parkinson's. They are typical of this levodopa-induced dyskinesia.
So I have a question because I've heard it kind of like thrown around, but I never really looked into it or what it means. What is the difference between Parkinson's and Parkinsonism? Wow. Thinking of not being able to pronounce words. You know what I'm talking about. Parkinsonism.
Right. So patients who have Parkinson's-like movements, typically from anti-seizure or antipsychotic drugs, can
like
have
a side effect.
Right. But it's not actual Parkinson's.
Okay.
So these levodopa-induced dyskinesias usually are 2 to 3 years after you're on treatment. And, after 5 years, that increases to almost 50%. Not everybody's going to be as extreme as his. And they can range from very, very mild sort of movements to very severe movements like we see with Michael J. Fox, and they can interfere with your everyday activities of daily living. Think about dressing yourself, feeding yourself if your body is moving in a way that you don't intend it to. And then the other thing is tardive dyskinesia, which is, we said, is very common with medications. So this is because of the antagonism of dopamine receptors. They can have a lot of like mouth smacking. It's like tongue clicking, pill rolling of their fingers. And that can be seen, like we said, antipsychotic or anti-seizure meds. So those are kind of the most common or well-known. A couple other things that can cause chorea. There can be like a metabolic disorder. I don't think that's going to be a permanent chorea. Infectious, actually, the thing that actually can cause it is rheumatic fever, which is caused by strep. So strep infections, which are very common in children, can back in the day would often progress to rheumatic disease, rheumatic heart disease, because we didn't have antibiotics or they weren't used as early. And then people can develop what's called Sydenham chorea, which happens because of rheumatic fever. We
could do a whole episode just on strep, because there's lots of psychological things too.
And a lot of other medical things too. And that affects girls more than boys, ages 5 to 15. And then it usually does resolve. It can happen, over days to weeks. And then, they typically, after rest and antibiotics, it should clear. Then we said other drugs, we've kind of mentioned antihistamines are an additional drug that can do this. Tricyclic antidepressants, cocaine and amphetamines, toxin poisoning like carbon monoxide.
So question, is like restless legs from like as a side effect from a medication, is that considered more of like this chorea?
Not that I've ever read or encountered. No, restless leg is a little bit different. Restless leg is most commonly, side note, from iron deficiency. So yes, there's true restless leg when you've ruled that out, but always check the ferritin level.
Good to know.
A couple other things, vascular issues, some brain tumors, Wilson's disease. So, there's quite a few things that can cause it and medications to treat it. So there is something called Austedo and Ingrezza. They are used typically for patients who have the side effects of the antipsychotics or anti-seizure meds to stop those sort of abnormal movements. And then what's interesting is some of the antipsychotic meds also are listed as possible treatments, which I don't really understand. But Haldol, flufenazine, olanzapine, aripiprazole, those are a little bit like aripiprazole and olanzapine are a little bit more modern than some of the older ones, but still.
And I was like, Haldol, geez.
Yeah. They can cause more Parkinson's-like stuff, but stop the chorea. So
yeah,
I guess
trading one for the other.
Right. Some seizure meds like Keppra, Klonopin can be used. And I think we talked a little bit with one of our episodes about deep brain stimulation.
Yes.
That also is something they're looking at for this. It's still experimental. And then there's a neurocell transplant that is something they're looking at for Huntington's. So I don't think that, everybody had Huntington's or, I think it is somewhere between the ergot and the mass psychogenic, or maybe a combination thereof, honestly. Yeah. I really don't know. I don't know what caused it, but...
I was going to say, if we figured it out and nobody else did, we'd be super famous right now.
But, like I said, it's an interesting thing. Everybody dancing in the town square, a response to stress, whatever it may be.
I'm always so curious of what it actually looked like, though, because I feel like it probably didn't look like dancing.
And probably didn't look happy. It probably looked not painful,
especially
painful,
after days.
stressful.
People are in agony. And then I'm wondering, like, are people able to clearly communicate what's going on? Like, help me, or talking about like that they're in pain, or are they just in the zone?
Right. And this occurred over a couple hundred years in that same region. Like, we're not talking about anywhere else. It's very strange.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I thought it was cool. And, definitely thanks for the inspiration. And that's why we drink, and this podcast will kill you. Yes. You are some of our inspirations to begin with. So it was kind of cool. And Florence and the Machine for this really cool song.
Yeah.
So that's what we got for you.
Yeah.
All right. So we have social media. Let's do the housekeeping. Follow us. Instagram, Medical Media Mixer. TikTok, Medical Media Mixer, YouTube, Medical Media Mixer Podcast, and email medicalmediamixer@gmail.com. I think that's all of it.
That's all. We'll include
We'll include our sources in our show notes. So you can click on any of those and read through them. And we will definitely be publishing our recipes for our drinks on social media prior to the episode airing. So hopefully you've already seen it. If not, you can go back and find it. And thank you everybody for listening to Medical Media Mixer.
The perfect cocktail. Cheers.
Cheers.